Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. This is going to be my slightly late May wrap up, and I have a lot of books to talk to you about. Funny enough, mostly DNFs, so hopefully it won't take too long for me to get through those, but I did have some other fantastic reads that I will go through later on in the video, so do stick around. But firstly, I'm going to talk about all of my DNFs. So first of all, I have A Tyranny of Petticoats. This is a short story anthology all about badass women in the young adult arena. I did give this a good go. I gave it 2 or 3 short stories, all of which were 3 stars, which made me then decide to give up on this. I just found that this anthology fell into the camp of either the short stories felt too ambitious for what they were trying to accomplish and therefore didn't really hit their mark, or I think didn't feel completed by the end. They weren't a satisfying reading experience, which I think someone who is very good at writing a short story can achieve even in a very short number of pages. I was originally drawn to this one because it was labelled as queer, but yeah, this one didn't work for me. Next, I have another one that I pretty much picked up because it was labelled as queer, and that is Dragon Queens. So this was a lesbian romance advertised on my audiobook app. I decided to give it a go, and it just didn't work for me. The plot was quite contrived, the main characters were rather annoying. I think that it was supposed to be going for that like snarky vibe, but yeah, it was just a bit dumb, so I decided to give up on this. And next we have Something Fabulous. Now, I'm really sad that this didn't work for me because I think it's indicative of the fact that this author's work doesn't work for me. Boyfriend material, husband material, I've been seeing get a lot of hype as a comp title to Red, White and Royal Blue by Katie McQuiston, and it really didn't work for me in that, and I decided to give her writing another go with this one, and I think that she's going for the snarky, fun historical fiction setting in this, but again, it just didn't work for me. With a lot of these snarky books, the main characters can be assholes, but they are lovable enough to the reader that you still root for them. I think a great example of this would be something like, what's his name? Henry? So Henry Montague in The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, and in the other books in this series. But in this, they just came off as arrogant and irritating, and I felt bad for the other people in their lives. So I knew that going through the book, having those negative associations would mean that I wouldn't enjoy my reading experience, so I decided to give up on this one. Next, we have a book that I think is excellent and would really enjoy it, but didn't work for me. So we have Not My Father's Son. This is a autobiographical memoir from, I can't remember who the author is, but they are a celebrity. However, it's the sort of memoir normally that I really enjoy, where rather than these are just a bunch of stories about my life for whoever's interested, it was going through one specific time in his life, and also like trying to teach the reader something that was bringing to light his incredibly neglectful and abusive father, and I'm sure had some really great things to say. I just found the subject matters brought up in here too triggering, and I think that the scenes that take place with the father are very much you are there with him. It's not that he's reflecting on them afterwards. So it was a very jarring reading experience, and I think that it was very impressively written. I really loved the writing. I think that from what people have told me, it's got some amazing parallels, and he's clearly a very talented writer, but just not for me. Next, a huge shift in tack, and that is Lady Stuff, which is a collection of comic strips that just... the art style didn't really work for me, but I think that people who find the topics mentioned in here would probably find it far more funny than I did, because I didn't really relate to much of the things that she was talking about. It was both the art style and the comedy didn't really work for me, so I decided to give up on this one. Next we have, sorry, I'm trying to be snappy so that I can actually talk more about the books that I really enjoyed this month. So next we have another comic that I decided to give up decided to give up on, and that is Sensual Phrase. I probably have a volume of this. Hang on. Here we go. This is volume 17. So I picked this up, I can't remember when I picked it up. It was probably from a comic sale, and I had no idea what this was about going in. It was probably cheap in a charity shop or something. So what I decided to do was find volume 1 online, see if I enjoyed it and therefore wanted to continue. And I decided I didn't. I found that this falls into the camp of manga following young women who are starting a relationship where there is a very clear power dynamic. So that for me is just not a very comfortable reading experience. Also, I found that this wasn't going to get dark enough for me and the manga that I like reading at this point in my life. So I gave up on this one. Next, we have a couple of poetry collections. When I was in Waterstones, they were having a sale table of things that, I don't know, either weren't selling or got damaged, and I started reading a couple of poetry collections to see which ones I want to continue with, and these three I decided not to for whatever reason. First one being My Poetry. This just didn't grab me. It wasn't particularly sophisticated. It didn't really move me in any way, so I didn't continue. Next was 20s Scotland, and this one I think just didn't work for me because I didn't get the Scottish context. I think there was too much, well, not too much for like the average reader, but probably too much for me to really get the full context and the full sort of impact of this poetry. But the author, like, there was a bunch of stuff on the front about it being a very well-known author from Scotland, so I'm sure this poetry is very good, just not for me. And third one being Lunch Poetry, and this one was just too metaphorical for me. It all went over my head and I was like, I don't know what this is saying, so I'm not really enjoying it. So that's the poetry. Then we have A Gift for a Ghost, a graphic novel that I decided to pick up on a whim. And the art style of this is stunning. It was really, really gorgeous, but I don't know if this is a me thing because of I saw so many people really enjoying this in the reviews, but it kind of felt like you were really dropped into the world, and that's fine. But moving forward, I found that in between every scene, it felt like we were missing so much of the story, and I really didn't grasp what was going on. So despite the fact that it was beautiful to look at, I was very confused. So I decided to give up on that one too. I promise I'm nearly done with my DNFs. Next we have Lucifer on Leave. This one I picked up because it was labelled as gay or LGBT on my audiobook app, but I can't find any reference to that on Goodreads or in terms of any of the Goodreads reviews that I've looked at. So it could be gay, it could not be. I, again, didn't finish it. Now, this is a comedy about, I do hope I've just realised I don't know if I've been describing the actual like plot lines of any of these books going through. I'll have to edit it back in if I haven't, apologies. But this book follows Lucifer. He is allowed a period of time off every number of years in hell, and he is given the body of a human, and he has to figure out what is the current fashion, what is the current speech, and it's kind of like a holiday for him. Yeah, the comedy really didn't work for me in this one. I didn't find Lucifer a particularly interesting character to follow. Also, because the setting and the author is Australian, I found that a lot of the humour didn't really land. I really didn't understand the jokes, and I am told that this book has a like glossary in the back, so if I had the physical copy I could like flip through, but I don't think I was enjoying it enough to warrant having to do that, so I decided to stop this one. And is this my last DNF of the month? No, it's not. Okay. Then we have a Dream of a Girl. This one is a collection of short stories, all focusing around trans people, and I think this is a very soft DNF. I think out of all of these, this is one I can see myself returning to, and I think that the cover gave me the wrong expectations going in, so it didn't end up being what I wanted in the moment. So from the cover, it looked like it was going to be fantasy horror vibes, and at least for the stories that I got into in this collection, it was very much contemporary modern day. So if this seems interesting to you, I would definitely give it a go, and I might return it to it in the future. Next, we have a book that I actually got quite a way into before I decided to give up on it, and that is The Solstice Prince. So this one reads quite young, but it was very, very wholesome. But that's not the issue that I had with it, or it being quite young isn't the issue that I have had with it. It was a very sweet story, but I think that I would be interested to see what this author comes out with in a couple of books' time. I think that with this story, it was too cut and dry for me. All of the good characters were, absolutely nothing was wrong with any of them. They were all super supportive, super helpful and kind and caring, and they were really unrealistic in that way. All of the bad characters were completely evil and terrible and had no good in them whatsoever. There was practically no conflict going through the entire book. We are following a main character who is new to the kingdom he's currently living in. He was sold off as a slave and used as a slave, and then was rescued by this new place, and he clearly has some terrible PTSD from his experience and is learning that not everyone is out to hurt him, and I think that's a wonderful thing to have in here. But yeah, I just don't think that there was quite enough conflict and complexity in the story for me to enjoy it. And finally, for the DNFs, we have actually a reread for me, and that is Blackbird Volume 1. I, again, read this a while ago. I read this and Volume 2 a while ago. I really enjoyed it. And over time, I've been collecting the rest of the series, and I think I've actually bought now all of the rest of the volumes. I reread this and it was way too ridiculous for me. This follows a girl who can see spirits and demons, and one day finds out that her blood is very appetizing, and so has to team up with one of the demons to offer her protection against all the others. This again falls into the camp of a young woman forming a relationship with someone where there is very clear power dynamics, and it was very uncomfortable to read. Also, it was just a bit stupid, so I decided to give up on this, and I will be getting rid of the rest of the volumes. Why do I waste my money like this? I do not know. So now we are on to my 3 stars. So this one, again, was one that I read the first volume of, enjoyed it, decided to collect the rest of the volumes, and then reread this one and decided it was no longer for me, no longer was really capturing my attention, so I decided to give up on this. Again, we are following a young girl who is entering a relationship with very clear power dynamics, and it's very uncomfortable to read. So we have someone who is a spirit medium? How do they explain it? Shrine maiden. So in this universe, demons and things exist. The general population don't know that that is the case, and shrine maidens pass down ways to defeat demons, and our main character is kind of useless. She doesn't really get to learn much of what she's supposed to, and ends up defeating a very powerful demon by saying something random, and it ends up working, and she then doesn't know how to reverse the spell. So yeah, this was rather stupid, and I will be getting rid of this one. And my next 3 star is another comic, and that is Success is 90% Spite. So this one, again, is a series of comic strips, all by one author, and the art style worked a little better for me in this one than it did in Lady Stuff, but I think that it was a fine read, but not something that's going to be super memorable to me. Some of the humour was very relatable, some of it wasn't, and I don't really have much else to say about this one. It was fine. Next we have a book I own, so let me get that. Next we have the Arcana Tarot by Dorian is the publisher. I can't remember who this is by exactly. The backstory to this is that I play a game on my phone, which is a visual novel. You play through the game learning the story between the characters, and the way that you interact with the characters or respond to certain points in the story changes the outcome of the story. And the fantasy world involves tarot readers and tarot cards, and as part of the story it's clearly done by people who actually know what is involved in a tarot deck and made their own tarot deck. So this book goes through each of the cards in the tarot deck, their beautiful artwork, and what each of the cards mean if you were to want to use their tarot deck to play tarot, not play tarot, do tarot? I don't even know, like, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but I really enjoy the game and I wanted to find out more because I was curious. And I actually think that as someone who doesn't believe in any of this stuff, I think this gave a very good introduction, and I think was very honest about how much of this stuff is open to interpretation and how the person doing the reading uses, it's kind of a way to tailor advice for someone rather than a magical mystery, let's ask the cards thing. So this was a very enjoyable read. Next, I have two of the poetry collections by Ruby Kaur, and that is The Sun and Her Flowers and Homebody. I'm going to try and angle this so that I can put Homebody up there. So I've been getting way more into poetry recently, so I decided to pick these up. Some of these really spoke to me, and I really not enjoyed them, but I found them very impactful, especially the ones about race and identity. And again, these are poetry collections, so they don't have an inherent plot for me to explain to you, but if you're someone who's been getting into poetry collections, I think that these two were really solid. I will have to pick up Milk and Honey by that author. Next we have The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. This one is a reread for me. I read it for the Carnegie Award because our school was one of the schools where students were chosen to read and then vote on their favourite books, and I wanted to complete the trilogy but needed to have reread this one in order to do so, and I was amazed with how much I actually forgot about this story. So this follows a boy in a world where everyone can hear everyone else's thoughts and there are no women left, and our main character Todd finds a spot of silence and therefore is forced to flee his community, and it's very much a road trip story from there. I thought this had such fantastic commentary on privacy and thoughts and the blame of people who are othered when you're scared, and I'm really interested to see how this one continues in the trilogy, but I think it's definitely worth all the hype it's been getting. I've heard that the movie of this is absolutely terrible, so I probably won't give that a watch, but I don't know, I think this deserves a really good adaptation because I think it could be a really solid one. Next we have a short story from the Grishaverse, and that is The Tailor. So this is a short story following Jenya, who is one of the characters that Alina meets in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I don't think this really works on its own without having the context of the rest of the books. I think that this is very much to give you more backstory towards Jenya as a character and why she makes certain decisions. I thought it was a very enjoyable read, and I think that it did give that. The original trilogy works without this, but it was nice to hear more about the character and her reasons for being the way she is, and also I think had some really lovely themes of belonging and jealousy. Next I have The Long Way Home. This is a paranormal story following two men who are assigned a murder case where there seems to be no evidence left. They're finding it really difficult to find the culprit. One of them is part of the police force and is assigned a psychic medium who he thinks is a crack job, but sort of has to go through protocol and is told to take his stuff seriously. One of whom is the psychic medium, who we find out by being in the head of that he truly does have these powers, and it is about how they solve the crime together. I think this got suitably dark and had some really great messages and themes, while also building out while also being mainly, I would say, a romance between these two characters, and I really enjoyed this. that was also queer, so that's why I ended up picking up in the first place. Next we have a novella called They. So this is touted as a very seminal queer text that might have been lost, if not re-released, by the person who found it, like falling apart in a thrift shop. So I can honestly say that I've never read a book like this. It was a very interesting story, and it's a collection of short stories following, I'm assuming, a different main character each time, and they are existing in a world where some sort of organisation are in the process of removing anything that promotes non-conformity. Throughout, you just got this sense of tension and fear from the main characters, and I think that built really well and sustained that throughout. I've heard someone theorize that each of the stories is from the perspective of one of the characters who is from the first story. I'm really not sure. I'm sure that this is something that someone could do a huge analysis on in terms of the themes and the like who was who and all the connections between the characters. But if you like dystopian fiction, I think this is definitely something that deserves to be a classic that is more talked about, because I think it was excellent. And finally, for 4 stars, we have a little book, and that is The Fall of Icarus by Ovid. So I'm very interested in Greek mythology, and I already know this story. So Icarus was the son of the guy who made the labyrinth for the Minotaur. They decide to escape by, well, the guy, his father, I can't remember his name now, but he decides that his plan for escape is to build wings held together by wax so that they can fly away from the tower they are trapped in. Icarus flies too close to the sun, the wax melts, and he plummets to the ocean below. So I wanted to read, I don't know whether or not this is like the first or the oldest version of this story that we have. I'm not sure in that history, but I decided to read this. Something I was very surprised by was how quickly we went through the story of Icarus. I didn't quite realise. It's just an interesting way that stories get told or were told. It was incredibly fast-paced and moved through interconnected stories incredibly quickly. So we don't spend a lot of time actually getting to know each of the characters or their emotional struggles or the things that they're dealing with. It's very much this happened and this happened, this person is connected to this person, and then it goes into another story. So I would almost call this like a collection of very short stories, and I got to know much more about different Greek myths. I also thought that it's very cool to see how at this time there were so many ways in which there was no judgment in terms of things that people find to judge in others now. So an example being that in here we are talking about the Argonauts, and there's the mention of the female Argonaut. I do need to read a book about her. I think there's been one published recently. And also in terms of some of the armies that it talks about, sometimes it goes through like the different members of a group of soldiers, and it'd be like this person, this person, this person who used to be a woman and is now a man. And that's just like a statement, and we move on, and there's never any conflict brought about by having that included. And I think that's just amazing how backwards we are compared to something like this, which is just wild. So next on to my 5 stars of the month. So I had one short story that I read that was, I think, an Audible original, and that was Townie. Now, with most of the books I read, I picked this up because it was queer, and I was so impressed by this. This is just such a masterclass in how to tell a short story that feels complete and gets across a message with really complex characters where you feel like you know the characters. It's following a woman who develops a friendship with another woman, and how they don't really fit into each other's worlds, but they try and make their friendship work, and it follows them over a number of months of this friendship. And I just thought that it was so well done. I think that it had excellent discussions of discrimination and race and sexuality and gender identity, and it never felt heavy-handed in any of those conversations, while also working them really smoothly into the plot. If you were into short stories, I would definitely recommend checking this one out. And next, I will probably talk about all of these in tandem because they're all by the same author, and that is KJ Charles. Last year, this author became a real favourite of mine. I discovered a bunch of books I really loved by them. I love the way they write their characters. Pretty much all of these are historical stories that are very queer, but also focus way more on hijinks and relationships than really serious historical fiction. So first of all, the new to me books, because I did have some rereads. First of all, we have Band Sinister. So in this one, we follow two siblings, a boy and a girl, who have been disgraced within society and at the fault of the family who live next door to them. And they feel very trapped in their situation. They can't really do much about it because they are under the monetary control of a distant relative, and so they have to keep this relative happy in order to be able to survive. And then the sister is out riding one day, breaks a bone on the land of the neighbour who they have a lot of animosity towards, and ends up having to, so she ends up having to stay in his house, and in order to protect her virtue, the brother comes too. And it is about them finding out that actually these are really nice people, and how society looks down on them also, and about the growing relationship between the brother and one of the guys in the house. It was just really, really fun and such a light-hearted romp. The themes in this one are, you have don't judge a book by its cover, also about going after what you want in life and protecting your friends. It had a lot of great discussions around polyamory as well. I think that there is a friendship group in here who love each other very much, and then when there is this new person, I think that there's a lot of discussion about how that's going to work out in the short term, but also in the possible long term, and I think those discussions were very healthy. So a very enjoyable read that I will definitely reread at some point. The next one, which is again this historical fiction setting, but this one has a slight bit of fantasy, and that is Spectre or Spectred Isle. So this one is a part of a series that is following people with inherited abilities who are tasked with looking after and preventing paranormal disasters from hitting the country. And so in this first book, I mean, it says it's a series on Goodreads, but I actually haven't seen whether or not the next book is even out. Maybe this is an ongoing series by the author. But this first book follows one of the people who is tasked with protecting the country from paranormal entities, and someone who came back from the World War disgraced and is now working for sort of an old guy who has a personal interest in paranormal activities. So despite the fact that he doesn't believe in any of it, he gets tasked on finding these things around London, and they keep on crossing paths, and they distrust each other and don't know why they keep on finding each other in the same places. And so when bad paranormal things start to happen, they either have to work out if either one is in some way related to the cause, or whether or not they have to work together in order to defeat this. Again, I think that the relationship and the snarky, sassy banter is what drives these books for me. I really love it. I think that in this one, the paranormal stuff took a little while to get explained to me. I think that it was certainly a book where it dropped you in and expected you to get the gist, especially when you were in the head of the guy who's the paranormal person. But it definitely evened out over the story. But again, I love this, and if or when the author decides to continue in this series, I will definitely be reading. And finally, we have a reread of the Will Darling series by the same author. So we have Slippery Creatures, The Sugared Game, and Subtle Blood. This is just such a fantastic series. I really love the development of the relationship between the two main characters. We're following Will, who is someone who went off to fight in the war, was trained as a killer, came back from the war with a lot of mental scars that he doesn't address, and was sort of left to flounder for himself, and he managed to find a job from a distant family member looking after a bookshop, so he's trying to adjust to the quiet life. And we are following Kim, who is a rich aristocratic person who, when mysterious things start happening in the bookshop, might be Will's only contact in terms of actually figuring this stuff out. And this just did such a fantastic job of the development of the characters and of their relationship, and of family struggles and identity struggles and class and expectation. And these are just such fantastic books, and I'm sure I will reread them again in the future because I really love them. So there you have it. Those are, well, some of the books I read or didn't finish in the month of May. And so I will just pause for a thumbnail screenshot. And anyway, I would love to hear about a book that you've read and enjoyed recently, or one that you haven't, and one that you decided, I'm going to DNF this, I don't want to finish it. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.